me, trains are about getting from A to B, but there are people of all ages who love the romance of the golden age of the railway. When the first train left Belfast for Lisburn in 1839, it changed our lives forever. Fast, dangerous and exciting, the railway sped up the pace of industry, commerce and communication. At one time, almost everyone in the country lived within 5 miles of a station. People who had never been out of their hometown or village could take a trip to the city or spend a day at the seaside. I'm much too young to remember all that, but I've spoken to people up and down the country who can't understand why most of our railway network was abandoned almost 50 years ago. I want to find out what the attraction is, to see if there's any trace left of these old lines, any hidden history to be found in some of the places they pass through. And that brings us to tomorrow. Temperatures will rise to about 18 or 19 degrees for many of us. Then as we look ahead towards the rest of the week and into the weekend, plenty more dry weather to come. Well, there you are. That was the weather. Not looking too bad at all. Perfect for getting away from the weather desk for a few days to walk the line. If it's not too strange an idea, I'm going to start my walk at the end of a line. This line, part of the old Ballymena, Cushendall and Red Bay railway route. As the name implies, it should have gone all the way to Cushendall and Red Bay, but railway engineers were defeated by the steepness of the slope. So this is the last stop, Retreat, high up in the Antrim Hills. This uninhabited railway cottage and platform, close to the ruins of Retreat Castle on this desolate moorland, marks the end of the line. And the reason the line ends here is that for the train to ever reach its proposed destination of Red Bay, the line would have had to drop around 1,000 feet over 4 miles, zigzagging its way down the glens towards the coast. Our journey today will take us through some of the most breathtaking scenery of County Antrim, from the glens to the coast. Over rugged rocks and rushing rivers, through lowlands and highlands. In fact, the Ballymena, Cushendall and Red Bay line made it to a summit of 1,045 feet above sea level, making it the highest point ever reached by an Irish railway. The line of the old railway runs past Essatohan Bridge and straight as an arrow ahead of me and down Glenballyeman. It's hard to believe that trains once disturbed the peace and quiet of this landscape, but this was once a commercial centre, a hive of activity. Hundreds of workers mined iron ore out of these hills. Hundreds of horses carted it down the mountains. This area became well known for its high quality ores when James Fisher from Barra and Furnace in northern England started his mining operation in Glenravel in 1866. This was before large-scale mechanisation. Mining was very labour-intensive and demanded a lot of local manpower. At first, it was difficult to find competent workers, but in a short time, ordinary farm labourers adapted to the difficult work, and most were capable of picking 2 to 3 tons of ore each day. I'm on my way to meet local historian and tour guide Donal O'Lone. Donal, how are you?
Hello, Barra. Good to meet you.
So what is this, apart from a ruin?
Well, it certainly looks like a ruin, and but it's the last most noticeable feature of the iron ore mining of Glenravel.
Indeed, they were taking iron out of the ground.
They certainly were, and it's hard to realise just looking at the windswept area here just with sheep that there are actually miles upon miles of underground tunnels where so much iron ore was taken out of the ground.
And once upon a time you had hundreds of men here and hundreds of horses all as part of this operation.
Yes, there were, the estimate is that there were 700 miners working here. It was the most intensive iron ore mining area in Ireland.
And when you say iron, what did it look like when they were taking it out of the ground?
Well, it certainly didn't look like a piece of iron or a nail. It looked like this. This is one sample.
So this
of iron ore.
big orange rock.
This big orange rock, and you can feel that it's actually quite heavy.
How did they get this out of the ground?
Well, it was done by manual labour using tools like picks, shovels, wheelbarrows, and I have one of the picks right here. And as you can see, it's quite short because work in the mines was so cramped. It was very difficult work, very dangerous work, and I certainly wouldn't like to have had to do it.
So they took this out of the ground, and then what did they do with it?
The problem was there was plenty of iron ore here, but there was nothing to smelt it with. That had been tried using peat, but unsuccessfully. So the iron ore had to be taken cross-channel to places like Cumberland or to Scotland, and that meant it had to be taken to a port.
How did they get it off this hill?
The problem here was that there is a very steep slope down into Cargan village, like a ski slope, we might describe it. And that meant that wagons couldn't be taken down it. So a special system had to be produced in order to do that. And that is what we have here, the drum. There was a large wooden cylinder which was suspended between the two walls, and a cable around it lowered the wagons to the bottom of the steep hill, which is on the other side of it. 700
men, hundreds of horses. Big operation.
Well, 700 men working here, and of course this was the original reason why the railway had to be developed.
Ore production was at its height in 1880, when almost 120,000 tonnes of ore was locally produced. However, the richest ores in this area were soon mined, and almost as quickly as it had appeared, mining disappeared. Fisher's Mines, the original Glenravel mine, closed in 1913, and the miners, well, they had little choice. They either migrated to Scotland and England to continue mining, or fall back into their former agricultural jobs. This sculpture, keeping watch over the glen, is called the Angel of the Drum. It was designed by Ned Jackson Smith to celebrate the area's one-time association with iron ore mining. The human outline, depicted by the rust-coloured steel, symbolises man's connection with the rust-coloured earth. I'm really glad something remains of the iron ore industry. Something else which remains only just is the station building and water tower at Parkmore. That was the last stop for passengers on the Ballymena, Cushendall and Red Bay railway route. And that's where I'm headed to now, to meet Peter Irvine, also known as Irishman Lost. Peter is a dereliction photographer. He travels all over the country searching for places unseen by the public. Over the past decade, he has visited and photographed abandoned buildings under the pseudonym Irishman Lost. He wants to create an artist's vision of these buildings before they are gone forever. Pete, why are we here?
We're here basically to record the building and basically just see what's left of it. The fact that they're not going to be lasting that much longer, as you can see on this one here, the walls are about to give up.
A lot of them have already crumbled.
Yeah, I would say another couple of seasons and this building will be no longer. So this is the reason why I come to shoot these type of buildings.
And some people may wonder why you actually do this.
It's like walking through history. People that have lived here and gone on or possibly died, things like that there, it's always good to record them before people build new buildings and then they wonder what was here before, so that's why I do it.
When you're out taking your photographs, what exactly are you looking for?
Basically, I'm looking for not only the details, but sometimes it's just a door or a window or remains of what's been used beforehand. Even a fireplace can be quite an interesting shot.
Well, I was about to say there's not very much in this area that would suggest that this is a train station, but you see the old fireplace here and you can almost imagine the passengers huddled around the fire during the winter months waiting for the train.
Some of the buildings I've been in, the fireplaces are usually the first things that disappear, but any ones that are left are actually very interesting features.
Have you photographed any other railway stations, and if so, how does this one compare to those?
I have photographed stations both here in the north and in the south. This is probably the barest one of them all. It's hard to pick out any details within the building because there's nothing really left. It's basically scraped clean.
And it does seem a little bit different. This is concrete.
A lot of the railway stations are in the red brick or yellow brick as well, which make it a lot more of an interesting subject to photograph. Concrete can be difficult. The water tower's just up the track a bit, and it's red brick with the water tower on the top, and it's an interesting subject to photograph.
When passengers left Parkmore Station, they made their way to a line of jaunting cars, a bit like a modern-day taxi rank. But, like the trains, they've disappeared. Siobhan Ní Luain was born and reared in Glenravel. She was a prolific writer of poems and short stories, and many of her poems were written about her childhood memories. This one is called The Narrow Gauge Line. Looking up through the trees, leaning out from the door, I shall never again see the train from Parkmore, with its small shining engine, so sturdy and grand, and it winding its way through the length of the land. You never knew what that small train might be bringing to the halt by the bushes with all the birds singing, with its soft train of smoke and its rumble of thunder. And who would get out would be half a day's wonder. When I was a child, I'd have said that forever the train would endure just the same as the river. But the world's in a hurry with your life and mine, and it hasn't much use for a narrow gauge line. Let me tell you about a man called Barclay Dean Wise. His title was Railway Civil Engineer, but that doesn't do justice to his structural designs, some of which still exist today, like Portrush and Whitehead railway stations, and the place I'm heading to now. The tea room at the foot of Glen Arif, the Queen of the Glens. B.D. Wise worked under Edward John Cotton, General Manager of the Belfast and Northern Counties Railway, and together they developed the most prosperous railway in Ireland, showing a particular flair for the promotion of tourism. So, as well as his normal work on the railway and its stations, Wise designed promenades, bandstands, footpaths, golf courses and tea rooms. Mark Kennedy is Curator of Road and Rail Transport, National Museums, Northern Ireland. The railway companies may have been concentrating on industry, but he had the foresight to see that tourism could bring in the money.
Very much so, yes. His normal stock and trade would be railway stations, good track, bridges, that sort of thing. To design his own tea rooms in a very distinctive style is something really quite unusual.
Why did he do it?
I think he was very interested in the tourism potential of Ireland, along with his boss, E.J. Cotton. They did a number of things, of which this was probably the first large-scale development. The idea that they would lease one of the glens of Antrim, build a tea room, add in a photographic darkroom for use by the public. It's really sort of cutting edge stuff. I suppose it's like having Wi-Fi available today, something like that.
Is this typical of his signature look?
Yes, he was reputed to have gone on holiday to Switzerland and come back with a new look with hipped roofs, very steep pitches, a sort of a mock Tudor or stockbroker Tudor black and white timbered look, very often with the downstairs in a nice orangey brick colour. The best example probably would be Portrush railway station, probably the best one surviving.
And indeed, something like this would have helped develop this area into a little tourist mecca.
Very much so, yeah. Even today, it's still a lovely dramatic place with lots of tourists in the car park here. But it must have been really quite something in the 1890s to come here, and if you think of the late Victorian and Edwardian costumes of ladies in full-length dresses, and to actually come out into the wilds of County Antrim.
And it's still here today. It must have been quite successful in its time.
It originally hoped that the narrow gauge line would make them a profit for the iron ore business, but when that fell away, the tourism stuff came in and did really well for them for many, many years, to the extent that even in the 1930s they actually bought the property outright from the landowner.
And this isn't the only part of his legacy. We have Portrush railway station, Whitehead railway station. How unusual was that for a railway engineer?
Wise managed to pack an awful lot into less than 20 years with the northern counties. He developed Glenariff here, Blackhead Path at Whitehead, and ultimately the Goblins, I suppose, is his best remembered feature.
William Makepeace Thackeray, best known for his novel Vanity Fair, wrote a travel book in the 1840s called The Irish Sketchbook, and when he visited Glenariff, he described it as Switzerland in miniature. B.D. Wise would be happy to know that his waterfall walkway still attracts visitors from all over the world. The Ballymena, Cushendall and Red Bay line brought their ore down to the main station in Ballymena. I am staying with a narrow gauge line, but this time the Ballymena to Larne route, which opened in 1877. Passengers may have been an afterthought on the Cushendall line, but not on this one, which ran the most luxurious narrow gauge boat train in Ireland. My route takes me through Moorfields. The railway station opened here in 1878 for passenger and goods traffic. The two-storey red brick station house still stands in a cutting onto the bridge. The signal box is also a reminder of train traffic. A linen beetling mill and dye works provided employment, and the post office, store and dispensary catered for the other needs of this small community. The nearby Kells Water River is fast flowing and supplied water to the beetling mill. The mill now vanished from the landscape. This is the townland of Ballyboley, and looking around, it's hard to understand why a railway station was needed here. But of course, Larne is just down the track, and this line was used for the transportation of cattle, people, and paper. But before I reach the busy seaport of Larne, the train line runs through here, Clementswood. Samuel Longhorn Clemens, better known to you and me as the great American author Mark Twain, is reputed to have observed, "I spent a fortune researching my ancestors and another covering them up again." But would he have said that if he had ever visited this part of the world. Mark Twain was of Scotch-Irish descent on both his mother's and father's side of the family, his father being related to the Clements of this neck of the woods. It's nice to enjoy the solitude of this forest before my journey takes me onwards to Larne. Looking out across the loch from beside the James Chain Tower, I watch the ferries power their way in and out of the port. The Ballymena and Larne Railway line opened in 1878, and boat trains ran to Larne Harbour Station from Ballymena, as well as Belfast on the standard gauge line via Carrickfergus. Known as the short sea route, Larne-Stranraer was the route favoured by most businessmen travelling to and from London, and at Stranraer, trains with sleeping accommodation met the ships. The steamers, since the introduction of regular sailings in 1872, were mostly named after princesses, Margaret, Maud, and the infamous Victoria, which sank in 1953 off the County Down coast in treacherous weather, with a loss of 133 lives. Trains may still run to Larne Harbour on the main line, but not as a special boat train, and the ferries don't sail to Stranraer either, marking the end of 120 years of formal rail and sea connections. Writer and broadcaster Colm Flanagan recalls with affection the boat trains. We're told that the narrow gauge, the boat trains here, were the most luxurious in Ireland, if not the whole of the British Isles. What made them so popular?
Well, the narrow gauge was built because there wasn't enough money to build standard or broad gauge railways. So it was a cheap way of doing things. So inevitably, passenger comfort was not really a priority for the management of those companies. They trundled along quite slowly. I mean, if you're doing 30 miles an hour, that was flat out, and that was considered unsafe. So really, most trains meandered through the countryside, stopped at all kinds of little places, maybe a mile or two from the nearest village, shunted some wagons, the passengers sat on. But to actually have a special train which ran non-stop over 25 miles of track was unheard of. So these carriages had corridor connections, toilets, electric lighting. They were really mainline carriages on this narrow gauge. That was what was unique about them.
Your father was heavily involved in them as well, and he would have known the boat trains. What were they for?
Well, to give an example, how my father used them, he worked at what was called the Ulster Transport Authority. And in fact, he was actually a busman. And he used to go over to work in London. He would leave home in the morning, travel to work in Belfast, get the boat train, as it was called, to Larne. It was a special fast train that didn't stop at the intermediate stations. Then he would get the ferry over to Stranraer, go to London on an overnight train, do his business, come back the next day. So the boat trains, both sides of the channel, were very important. The ferries were run by railway companies initially, and so they made the trains connect with the boats.
And hence the name boat train.
Exactly.
Colm was a boarding pupil at Coleraine Institute, and going home for the weekend, he can remember with excitement the sight and sound of the train as it approached the station. He started filming those train journeys, but this lifelong enthusiasm for trains was sparked even before his school days. Tell me why you love the railway so much.
Well, my interest in railway started when I was about 5 years old. I was given a train set, and my mother said, if this isn't looked after, it'll get taken away, but it didn't, and for some reason I just became more and more interested through my teens, and then when I was in my late teens I got interested in the railways of Ireland through meeting a friend at school who was fanatical and was in fact writing a book about them at that time, even while he was still at school, so he failed his exams.
So here we are, you are a railway enthusiast, your dad's closing the railways. There must have been a bit of conflict there.
Well, in fairness to my dad, he wasn't actually responsible for closing them, but he was part of the organisation which was involved in closing the railways. Yes, we did. We used to argue the bit. Were trains better than buses? And the fact is, there's no one answer to that question. Trains do certain things exceedingly well. That's why we still have railways today. They carry large numbers of people very quickly between fixed places. They're very good at that. But they can't possibly have a network that covers all the houses, all the places of work that people need to go to today, because society is so much more scattered now. We travel in our cars all over the place. We want something that'll do that for us. Trains can't do that.
Earlier, we visited Glenariff, where I told you about railway engineer Barclay Dean Wise and his visionary ideas. So I've left the boat trains of Larne, hopped down to Ballycarry, en route to one of his most spectacular engineering masterpieces, the Gubbins. Just as at Parkmore Station, jaunting cars would have been available to take tourists along this route, but I'm enjoying the walk. One of Wise's most spectacular civil engineering masterpieces, the Gubbins Path, which winds its way dramatically under cliffs over 200 feet high on the Island Magee coastline. The construction started in May 1901. The Gubbins Cliff Path was built so that tourists could literally walk over water, a heart-stopping, mind-blowing trail that ran along more than 2 miles of cliff face. All of it just a few feet above the waves of the Irish Sea. The railway company advertised the Gubbins as a walk with ravines, caves, and natural aquariums that has no parallel in Europe. Barclay Dean Wise was a visionary, and what a legacy he has left for us all to enjoy. He was an outstanding civil engineer. In his obituary, the Railway Engineer Journal recorded, Barclay Dean Wise's designs were both original and artistic, and he always strove to make the stations under his charge as attractive as possible. He was a great lover of the beauties of nature, and he will perhaps be best remembered as one who made several of the beauty spots of a beautiful country easily accessible without, in the least, marring their natural charms. When this cliff path opened in 1902, it drew worldwide acclaim. Newspapers of the day said the varied beauty of the cliff path baffled all description. I would certainly agree. Till next time, bye-bye.